Okay, so that's me. That's me doing what I do best, what I love doing, which is presenting. And just a little bit about me, I've been doing exam prep coaching for 14 years. I've had over 5,000 people go through classes. My classes range from ASM, PMP, PMI, ACP, and the PMI RMP. And those are the credentials that I have. Those are the classes that I teach. And I know we're here about the ASM. I've been doing project management in one form or another for a very long time, either in the business sector, private sector, or as an entrepreneur. For example, I worked for Compaq and HP as a project manager. I was vice president of a company in Southern California. I was the executive director of the California Commission on the Bicentennial Celebration of the United States Constitution. Some other things, those are just the highlights. So 35 years, it seems like, regardless of what the job was, I was developing content, being a presenter or a trainer. Now, I'll mention this again a little bit later, but there's a difference between how much money we make if we're certified compared to those that are uncertified. So, and depending on studies, I've seen several, it's 15% to 20% more than your uncertified colleagues. So I figure based on those that have been through my classes and gotten certified, collectively they're making more than $60 million a year than they used to. And I've been with Simplilearn now for 3 years. Absolutely love it. Simplilearn is a first-class organization. It's the largest training organization in the world. Recently it was named as one of the top 10 most influential education companies in the world. Let's just kind of get our heads into the game here, and let's just talk briefly about project management. Not that you don't know this, but this kind of gets us going and helps us get onto the same page. So I view project management as the science of getting stuff done, and everybody needs to get stuff done, and you know, humanity's needed to do stuff, you know, for a very long time. And if we think about the pyramids in Egypt, the Roman aqueducts, cathedrals in Europe, the first transcontinental railway in America, all of these are examples of projects. And so there's always been some kind of project management going on. It was informal and didn't begin to emerge as a profession until the mid-20th century. And in fact, prior to the 1950s, projects were just managed on an ad hoc basis, maybe using Gantt charts or informal techniques and tools, but in the 1950s, that's the real beginning of modern project management, where core engineering fields came together to work as one. And so, you know, just, you know, definitionally, a project is a temporary endeavor that results in something unique, meaning it's not part of our routine day-to-day operations. Developing a software application, constructing a building, expanding sales into a new market, and conducting a research effort are all examples of projects. And as I'm sure you all know, they need to be expertly managed in order to deliver the value the customer wants on time and on budget. As I'm sure you are aware, there are two basic approaches to project management. There's waterfall and agile, and at a high level, the differences are that the waterfall approach, or the plan-driven approach, favors projects with clear requirements and the creation of a master plan upfront, and then measuring actual results to the plan as the project's being executed on in order to determine the health of the project. The Agile approach focuses on projects with unclear or changing requirements and delivering value to the customer in frequent short iterations. Agile evolved in the 1990s in response to three main issues. These are problems that software developers had in using the traditional waterfall approach when it came to projects for developing software. One is the heavy burden of documentation. Documentation in the sense of upfront requirements, a big master plan, status reports, details like that. Frequent requirement changes and poor quality software. And Agile is a family of methods. And we're going to talk more about Scrum today than any of the others, but from a generic point of view, one of the Agile thought leaders, Scott Ambler, described Agile this way. Agile is an iterative and incremental evolutionary approach to project development, which is performed by in a highly collaborative manner by self-organizing teams with just enough ceremony that produces high-quality software in a cost-effective and timely manner which meets the changing needs of its stakeholders. I got a question here. Does project management belong to operations? No, that's a good question. So operations are those ongoing things, those routine things that a business needs to do on a daily basis to keep the business going. Projects are efforts that result in something unique in order to advance the strategic direction of the company, like make money, for example, or reduce the cost of operations. So while you might use some project management practices to do operations, operations themselves are not projects and would not benefit from using all of the practices that we use in project management. Now, team, I was going to use my whiteboard and talk about the triple constraint and the Agile triangles. And if you can picture a triangle in your mind, one side is scope, another side is schedule, and the other side is cost. And the triple constraint triangle is used to describe what a project manager's responsibilities are. And it goes something like this. Your job as a project manager is to balance the competing demands of scope, schedule, and cost while maintaining a high level of quality. Now, the Agile triangle, which is actually an invention of a guy named Jim Highsmith, another one of our Agile thought leaders, said actually because Agile is different than the waterfall approach, we can take that triangle and look at the three corners of the triangle. So picture a triangle, and at the bottom right corner, that would be labeled the triple constraint, meaning scope, schedule, and cost. So even in Agile, we have to deal with scope, schedule, and cost. We don't get away from that, although those are managed differently in Agile than they are in Waterfall. And then over on the bottom left corner, that would be intrinsic quality. So intrinsic quality is from the team's point of view. This is addressing the correctness of the code that's being written. It's being tested, unit tests, etc. And so that has to do with the verification or the correctness of the code. It's the team view, it's the intrinsic quality. And it also includes how the project is being run. Is it being run well? Are we using the Scrum practices and techniques as we're supposed to? And then at the top of the triangle, that corner there is the extrinsic quality. And that's the customer's point of view. So that's acceptance. And there are tests associated with acceptance as well. So that's the validation, that's the acceptance, that's the customer point of view. And so the Agile triangle reflects the emphasis that Agile puts on delivering high-quality software, recognizing that you have to focus on both the intrinsic side as well as the extrinsic side in order to have an acceptable quality outcome. Now, when it comes to Agile versus Waterfall for software projects, I've got a graphic right here that shows that Waterfall versus Agile is vastly different when it comes to the results. Notice, looking on the left-hand side, 29% of waterfall projects, software development projects, fail. In Agile, only 9%. Now, there's still, a high level of, challenge that's a part of it, but notice that 14% success versus 42% success. So the reason that one of the reasons you're probably on this webinar right here is because something's going on in your world that is making you interested in Agile and Scrum in particular. And this is why, because organizations that have been using the traditional approach are recognizing, at least when it comes to software projects, that Agile is a much better approach. And I've got a little bit of a summary chart right here that focuses on some of the key differences between the traditional approach and the Agile approach. Looking at planning, in Waterfall, the emphasis is on upfront planning. In Agile, it's on ongoing planning. In fact, the Waterfall detailed requirements are defined upfront prior to starting. And then in Agile, we only use a high-level product backlog upfront and then defer planning decisions as long as possible. When it comes to communications, and this speaks to documentation, it's formal and structured versus in Agile, it's people-oriented with informal but constant communication. And then when it comes to project ceremonies, and those are like meetings, events, things like that, in Waterfall, there's a high degree of project ceremony. Team meetings, formal project reviews, documented status reports, etc. In Agile, it's low. It's low project ceremony. Few team meetings, brief project reviews, and document status reports that are just a high level. When it comes to measuring progress, in Waterfall, that is demonstrated by artifacts and milestones. In Agile, it's demonstrated by working software. That is delivered to the customer. And then when it comes to change, Waterfall has formal change control procedures. And in Agile, there's limited or no formal change control. And back in Waterfall, scope control is essential in order to control cost and schedule. And in Agile, scope is expected to change and expand in order to meet the customer's needs. Because we've been talking about these two approaches, I don't want anybody to get the opinion that, all projects should be done using Agile. That's not the case. Waterfall works. There's a reason why, lots of people want to go out and get either their PMP or their Prince2 certifications, for example. It's because the traditional, more structured approach works. And so here's a spectrum that kind of shows you where the sweet spot for Agile is. In kind of the pinkish color there, the simple and complicated boxes represent those projects that are probably best used by, would best benefit from using the waterfall approach. And then in the green area, that's the sweet spot for Agile. So that's where there's a high level of complexity and uncertainty. That's when you want to approach it using the Agile, one of the Agile methods. There's also an area that we just call anarchy or chaos, and that's where there's really nothing that's organized yet to use some kind of formal approach. And the chaos or the anarchy would need to be resolved and moved into either Agile or into the waterfall segments here in order to really be managed. Let's see, I got a question here. PMP is mostly based on waterfall, where CSM is on Agile. Does having both certifications make sense? So that's a question from Prashant, and it makes sense to me. In fact, here's what I believe. This is what I see going on. The most valuable and effective project managers of the future, going forward, will be those that are certified in both waterfall and Agile, some kind of Agile certification. I have certifications in both, and it has helped me in both running waterfall projects and running agile projects. And in fact, most projects are going to be run in some kind of a hybrid format. And so if I'm hiring somebody that I want to be on a team for a project of mine, I would want to see something like the ASM and the PMP. If I saw that, I think, okay, that person has got the skills, the knowledge, the experience that I need. You mentioned the CSM. Now that's a Certified Scrum Master. That is a little bit different than the ASM, and I'll get into some of the differences in just a little bit. The CSM is a relatively lightweight certification. It's very popular, but it's an open book. You know, you go to a training, open book, done. You know, basically if you're breathing, you can get it. There's no experience or training needed. The ASM requires some training. And so if an employer is looking at the ASM, you know, employer is going to say, okay, I know this person had to go through some training in order to be able to get that certification. But either way, the point of the question is, you know, waterfall versus agile, and my answer is you got to have certifications in both. ASM stands for Agile Scrum Master. Ed, PSM, help me out with that. What's PSM? Professional Scrum Master? Is that what that one is? Yeah, okay. I'm not as familiar with that one, so I probably can't comment on it. That might be a more intense version that is offered by the Scrum Alliance. And maybe you know better than I do on that. Okay, so now, in fact, that question was actually a great segue into this because I think that it's worth noting that while there's probably more people that have started with the waterfall certification and are now looking at agile than the other way around, as I was just mentioning, I think successful project managers are going to need to be certified in both. So getting your ASM, so again, that's the Eggs in ASM, Agile Scrum Master credential, also increases your earning potential. And this is what I was talking about when I was introducing myself a little bit. And, you know, there are entities that do these surveys, you know, for different types of careers. And depending on the year, it fluctuates a little bit, but generally speaking, certified project managers are going to earn 15 to 20% more than their non-certified peers. And also in most of those studies, it indicates a steeper trajectory for your career. So we all know that, you know, certifications count for something in the world. We may not love standardized testing and kind of think it's a lousy way to measure someone's real-world potential, and I sort of agree with that, but you know what? It doesn't really change anything because people want to see certifications. And so you use a company like Exam and Simplilearn, people know that that means it's legitimate, that it means something. And, you know, a person will still have to prove themselves in the real world, but you know, that's a great place to start. Let's see, I'm just looking at the chat box over here. Oh, that's by the Scrum organization. Oh, so that's the competing one. Yeah, yeah, I know a little bit about that. A guy named Mike Cohn, who's a big Scrum guy, he started the Scrum Alliance. There were some problems. He withdrew. He started another one. So there's a little bit of mix-up over there. But, you know, the reason that we're even talking about Scrum and whether, you know, it's ASM or other certifications that have to do with Scrum, it's because Scrum is the leading agile method. You know, there's a bunch of methods that belong to the family of Agile. There's Scrum, there's XP, there's Crystal, there's Kanban, there's DSDM, APM, FDD. There's a whole bunch that all fit under this umbrella of Agile, but of all Agile projects, more than 50% end up using Scrum. So the reason that Scrum is so popular is because it emphasizes small, empowered teams. And we need to chat about that in just a minute because actually you can scale Scrum now. There's some standards for that so that you can actually do very large projects still using the Scrum approach. But Scrum is, you know, it embraces changing requirements, which is very attractive to the customer and the business interest in an organization. Potentially shippable software is the output of each sprint, and if sprint is a new term to you, that's just the label for a short iteration or increment that the team engages in order to develop software. And when I say short, in Scrum, it's 2 to 4 weeks in duration. So at the end of every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever it is, the customer gets working software. Now, the customer may not want to release it yet, but if it is releasable and the customer wants to release it, the customer could do that right away and even get some return on investment. So in my real world, I have a project that I'm working on, and it's a website, and our product roadmap calls for 3 different versions. But when we release version 1, which is going to be free to everybody, it's going to have a tool that people can access if they want and use it for free. But we're also going to include the ability to do some banner ads and other things like that. So even before we start working on version 2, we'll have some revenue coming in. And then version 2 includes a you know, additional tools and a subscription ability, so that will have its own return on investment built into it. And then version 3 adds additional tools and the opportunity for people to earn a commission if they refer somebody. But for that kind of a project that I'm just describing, waterfall would be very difficult to use. But using Scrum, it'll work great. And and I'm sure some of you have already experienced that as well, so you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't and you're new to Agile and you're new to Scrum, just understand that developers and customers, once they understand it, they love it. Not just because of the proven results, but because of the collaborative working together relationship which results in value early and often. So it's that's why it's so popular. I thought you might be interested, especially those of us that are kind of new to Scrum. This is an overview of what a project lifecycle looks like for Scrum. If you look over here on the left, there's what's called the product backlog. And each item in the project backlog is some kind of feature or function the customer wants to be developed. And so the product backlog really defines the scope of the project, and items can be added or removed at any time. We embrace change, we love it. So if the customer thinks of something new or wants to make a change, all the customer does is, you know, with the product owner, just change the product backlog. And then what the team will do is they will create a sprint which will include a number of items pulled from the product backlog, the top priority items, and maybe there'll be 2 or 3 or 4 depending on the size of the items that will be included in a sprint. And as I said, a sprint can be 2 to 4 weeks. In this example here, we're showing 4 weeks. And also, while the sprint is underway, there's a 24-hour cycle where the team starts the day with what we call the daily scrum, which is a short time box 15-minute meeting that allows the developers to coordinate their efforts. And then at the end of the sprint, there's some working software that's been developed, and it is showcased for the product owner and the customer, the end user, others that might be interested in it. And during that review, the software is demoed, and then the product owner says, yes, I accept it, or I reject it, and then the process starts over again and the team does another sprint. And this is all done with a relatively small size team. The rule of thumb is 6 plus or minus 3, so typically 3 to 9. individuals are on the team. Let's see, I got a question here. What's the difference between software incremental release practice and Agile? I would say it's probably the same thing. So Agile releases software in increments. So, you know, going back to the description of Agile right here, it is an iterative and incremental evolutionary approach to project development. So did that answer your question okay? Does that make sense? Okay, good. Thank you for that feedback. Okay, so we talked about the Scrum lifecycle a bit. Now let's talk a little bit more about why you're actually here and the ASM workshop that Simplilearn offers. So you cannot actually sit for the ASM exam unless you have completed successfully some training. And so what we offer at Simplilearn is kind of a combined thing where you get the training that meets the requirement to sit for the exam as well as treating it as an exam prep workshop as well. Somebody's pointing out here, I have a point to make regarding the previous question, and that is Scrum is accelerated Agile, possibly having small sprints. Right, in Scrum, the iterations are going to be 2 to 4 weeks in length. If we were to look at the overall family of Agile, it would be a little bit different. It would be 1 to 6 weeks in duration. There are a few that are shorter than a week and a few that are longer, but the vast majority of all Agile projects will use iterations or sprints that will be 1 to 6 weeks in duration, and in Scrum specifically 2 to 4 weeks. So that was good, thank you. What's the difference between Scrum and Agile Scrum? There's no difference. It's a different certification. And I'll cover the differences here because I think you will find the ASM to be very attractive. And it's relatively new, but it is emerging. In fact, I just got a call from my colleagues at Simplilearn today where there's a company, a global company, that wants to put a number of people through our workshop so they can get their ASM certifications, and they were just finding out when I could do that in-house class for them. So what we cover in the workshop will be, you know, key concepts of Agile. We're going to cover the basic stuff as all of the others do, but we will then focus on Scrum specifically. And so the course also has some breakout sessions and some games, kind of some hands-on engagement, so that when you're finished, even if you, even before you actually pass the exam, you can start applying the things that you've learned in your real-life experience. You'll learn specifically how Scrum adds value to the development and delivery of high-quality software. In the course, we're going to cover roles, ceremonies, artifacts that define and constitute Scrum methodology, as well as best practices for actually getting the maximum value from the Scrum method. So who's going to benefit from this? You know, anybody that's looking to update their knowledge of software development, project management is going to benefit from this course. And as a project management professional, you derive value in multiple ways. For example, you'll learn the best practices for Scrum and some of the other Agile methods. You'll get deep insight into Scrum and discover new ways of leading project management teams and delivering value to customers. You're going to get practical guidance on how to implement the practices, maximize their value, and then it also positions you very well to become an evangelist or a champion in the Agile adoption journey that your organization might be engaged in or contemplating. Let's see, another question here. Jeff, among Agile, Scrum, Scaled Agile, and Disciplined Agile, which one is the futuristic, most futuristic and important? So in my opinion, I would actually pick two and add something to your question there. So I think, you know, Agile Scrum, you got to have that, but then scaled Agile. So the baseline would be Agile Scrum. And you wouldn't, in my view, you wouldn't do anything beyond that until you had that down. And then scaled Agile is the next one. And knowing how to take a method that was originally designed for small projects and small teams and use that approach in order to do an enterprise-sized project. That's where the biggest, I think, return on investment is for us as practitioners, is scaled Agile. And then I would add to that being able to link our development efforts with operations. It's called DevOps. And also being able to link our efforts with service management. And those are things that are covered in the ASM exam and in the training that's not included anywhere else, at least as far as I know. So just another slide focusing on, you know, the value of the course. You're going to understand good practices that are used in different Agile methods. You're going to understand how the concepts can be implemented in your real world. You'll have a thorough knowledge of Scrum when you're finished. And here's something that I was just mentioning that's a little bit unique, and that is you'll be able to lead the Agile transformation in your organization. One of our lessons is actually on Agile adoption. And another one is on, one whole lesson is on scaling Agile. And then, of course, comprehension, you're going to learn new things, different practices, tools, and techniques, and how to derive value from those practices. So probably what the next thing to do right now would be to just give you a brief overview of what the course agenda is, see if it fits into what you need. And I'll keep my eye on the question box over here in case you have any questions. But lesson one is about Agile, you know, generically. And so we'll talk about what it is. We'll get into the Agile Manifesto. If you're in one of my classes, I'm also going to take you into the 12 guiding principles behind it. And then we're going to touch on Scrum a little bit, and we're going to also touch on Scrum adoption, Agile adoption. And then when we get into lesson two, we're going to chat just a little bit about waterfall, kind of like we did here. And then we're going to actually review some of the other Agile methods like XP and Crystal and Lean and DSDM. That's the same as A-Turn, by the way. And we're going to talk about DevOps, which I was just mentioning in response to that one question, as well as Agile and IT service management. And it looks like I got some action over here in the question box, so let me see here. Does the ASM course cover both Scrum and Scaled Agile? Yes, it does. Another question here, does ASM cover taking different statistics for a sprint? Cover taking different statistics for a sprint. Uday, and I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce your name, I apologize. I'm not quite sure what you mean. Could you try and rephrase that for me? Give me a little assist there. And while you're doing that, Kanban and Lean are the same framework. Actually, they're not. There is Kanban, there is Lean, and there's also Lean Kanban. And if you want, I could teach you about all three of those. We're not going to. We'll get into some of it a little bit. But we're going to spend most of our time when it gets down into the details on Scrum because, again, that's the most popular one, and that's probably even why you're here, right? You have some reason to want to know more about Scrum and get certified as a Scrum Master. Let's see, like calculating estimated versus actual. Oh yeah. So the question is, I guess about sprint planning. So yes, we're going to talk about the two most popular estimating methods. We'll do planning poker. We'll do affinity estimating. And we will spend a fair amount of time on the sprint retrospective, which is where we do problem detection and resolution and work on continuous improvement. So did that get you there, Uday? Is that what you were asking? And again, I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name quite right. Okay, yes, thank you. Perfect, thanks. When we get to lesson 3, this is when we start getting into Agile specifically. There's going to be the 5 values of Scrum. We're going to cover those. We'll go over the Scrum lifecycle. We'll have a screen similar to the one that I showed you, but we'll go into it in much more detail, covering sprint planning, the sprint itself, the daily scrums, the sprint review, the sprint retrospective. We'll talk about the concept of time boxing and why that's critical for Scrum to be successful. And we'll also go over key artifacts that are a part of Scrum. Product backlog, sprint backlog, release backlog, definition of done. We'll get into some of the information radiators that are used to display progress while sprints are underway. We're going to, in lesson number 4, we're going to cover the 3 roles that are a part of Scrum. There's the Scrum Master, the product owner, and the team. Most of the emphasis in lesson 4 will be on the Scrum Master side. But we will also cover the roles and the duties of the product owner and the team members. As we go through the course, we're also going to, do a breakout, and we're going to do a practice daily Scrum. We're going to do a practice planning poker session. We'll probably also do a release planning session, just so that, as we're going over some of these concepts, we'll just say, okay, now let's take a break here, and now let's just practice doing one of these together. While it's also exam prep, and when we go through the course, we're also going to tell you the things that we want you to memorize before you sit for the exam. So we'll be approaching it from, how do you pass the exam, as well as, how do you become a good certified Scrum Master. Lesson 5 is about Agile estimating and planning. We're going to talk about the differences between themes, epics, stories, tasks. We're going to talk about the different levels of planning. As I mentioned, we'll get into planning poker and affinity estimating. We'll talk about the difference between estimating using points as opposed to ideal time. In lesson 6, this is the one that focuses on scaling Agile. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about Agile in a distributed environment, where you have virtual teams, which it just seems like in everybody's world, even though, Scrum favors face-to-face co-located teams, technology has advanced and needs have advanced, and the world's just gotten smaller. So if you haven't, you're going to be in a virtual environment at some point in time. And I've been involved with projects where I had team members in the Philippines, Costa Rica, and different places in the United States. And, using technology, you can almost make it a face-to-face team room experience. So we'll talk about that a bit while we're going through lesson 6 as well. And then lesson 7 is one that I absolutely love. This is the one that has to do with adopting Agile. And lessons 6 and 7 are unique to ASM. And, to me, it adds so much more value to your certification as a Scrum Master, because it's not just how do you do a Scrum Master for a small team, but you get how to, be a lead in a much larger project where you might have, multiple Scrum teams that need to be coordinating together, etc. And then also, adopting Agile. In every one of the ASM workshops I've done, I've had people who were in the class either because they were in the middle of an adoption effort or their company was about to embark on it. And so we get into it. We even talk about the types of complaints you're likely to get, how to overcome them. We talk about the resistance that you'll likely get, and we talk about it in terms of being, diehards, followers, skeptics, and saboteurs, and we talk about how to overcome that resistance, what you actually do. And we even talk about strategies, is it going to be all in, or are you going to start small? Are you going to split and grow, or are you going to grow and seed, split and seed? So we get into all of that. We even talk about the HR department, which has to, modify its approach when it comes to, the organization and the different roles, the different responsibilities. Reporting is different in Agile. You don't have the same kind of individual focus and reviews because everything is focused on the team. So anyway, we get into all of that. When it comes to the test itself, which of course is how we memorialize our efforts, is to actually pass the exam. We say here that it probably takes about 120 hours of study to get ready. Maybe less depending on your exposure, but you know what? I have been noticing that based on our workshop, that's, the training / exam prep, we're getting it done with just that. Even people who have been brand new to Agile and Scrum, they're going and they're passing their ASM exam by doing our workshop. So the 120 hours is probably an overestimation, at least if you're going to use Simplilearn, because we've got it nailed. We know exactly what you need. We talked about the, some of the activities, case studies, etc., that are part of the training, which is mandatory before you can actually write the exam. Now, the exam itself, get this, it's a 90-minute exam, and there's only 40 questions. But you know what? It's not easy to pass. Now, let me say that differently. The questions are hard, and you got to think about them, but if you've been through our workshop and you've memorized what I asked you to memorize, and you've done, acquired the knowledge that you get by going through those 7 lessons, you'll get it done. I used this course itself for my own training and exam prep, and I passed first time. I didn't get 100%. Now maybe that will discourage you. I got 80%. Passing is 65%. So it seems like it'd be easy to pass, but if you have not gone through the training, you won't pass. There's not a chance in the world you'll pass it. You go through the training, yeah, you'll pass. You'll get your ASM. And then, as I mentioned, the course itself actually meets the training requirement that you have to submit to or verify with ExIn before you can write the exam. You think 80 is too good, huh? Now, what's funny is, it's broken up into some domains, and one of the domains I got 100%. So every question on it I got 100%, and that was adopting Agile. And I told you I liked that lesson the best out of all of them, and so that kind of reflects on my exam performance. The area that I did the worst in, I still was passing in that area, was the actual Scrum Master part. And that was because I have such a strong background in waterfall that I struggled with some of the scenario questions. So I'll be able to help you out with that when we go through the workshop to make sure that you really, you can't see me and I'm making all these hand gestures here to make my points and emphasize them. But in order to pass the exam, you have to successfully make the switch from thinking waterfall to thinking Scrum. And when you get that done, then it becomes a lot easier. But you know, for me, and I've been at this a long time, it was still a bit of a struggle. So anyway, I can help coach you through that as well. How does the ASM compare with the PMI ACP? That's a good question, and I can speak to that because I have them both. There are some similarities. You know, the ACP gets a little bit more in depth into the different methods of Agile. For that, you know, we're going to drill down, you know, I think we're going to go over 8 or 9 of the methods. And then it's more about Agile from a generic point of view. So we talk about Scrum and we get into it, but it's Agile from a generic point of view. So the ASM is got some of the Agile basics, right? The core stuff that you need to understand generically, but then the rest of the focus is on ASM, or pardon me, is on Scrum. I don't actually think that while there's some similarities, I actually see value in both, by the way. I love the ASM because of the emphasis on the Scrum Master. So if you're going to be in a Scrum environment, you would do better starting with your ASM, and then if you had a desire to know more about Agile in general, then the PMI ACP would be a good follow-up choice. So the ACP, that stands for Agile Certified Practitioner. And that's offered by PMI, which is the same one that does the PMP. So to kind of circle back to one of the questions that we had earlier, if you have your PMP, go get your ASM. After you have your PMP and your ASM, then you can start thinking about getting some more certifications that might flesh out your experience and resume a bit. What is the cost of the training course and the certifications? I don't know, and I had sent an email before class and I was hoping to get an answer back on that. I'm not involved in the sales at all, so maybe they don't want me to know how much it costs. But my understanding is that the cost of the ASM course also includes the cost of the exam. So whatever it is, it's an all-encompassing one. So Deepak and others that you know, are going to be interested in doing the ASM class, you're going to have to get online and you're going to have to go ahead and go through that process and find it out there. And you can tell I'm very American in my pronunciation of some of your names, and I am working on that. And I've got a pending trip to India coming up to actually go to Simplilearn's headquarters and meet some of the people that I work with on the phone and virtually all day, every day. And I'm hoping while I'm there I can get some more coaching on how to actually pronounce names. So please don't take it personally. I am working on it, and I'm better than I was, but I know I'm not there yet. Okay, so that's some information about the exam itself. Awesome team. Thank you for your interaction, your feedback, your questions. You all certainly helped contribute to the value of this endeavor, and with that I will say goodbye, and I look forward to crossing paths with you in the future.